Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to really dig into this anxiety research you sent over?
Absolutely, it's a hot topic these days, isn't it?
It really is. Feels like everybody's talking about anxiety and the research you sent, Ansi Dad. It really dives deep. But before we get into the why, maybe we should start with, what even is anxiety?
Right. Gotta start with the basics.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people, they hear anxiety and they think like, oh yeah, I get stressed, I get nervous sometimes. But this is talking about something a little different, yeah.
It is. Like, we all have those moments, right? Big presentation, job interview, waiting to hear back about something important, and your heart's racing a little.
Totally.
That's normal. It's our body's way of dealing with a perceived threat. But when that feeling becomes persistent, when it's not just a one-off, that's where it crosses into the realm of an anxiety disorder.
So it's like how Ansi had put it, chronic and excessive worry, even when there isn't a clear and present danger. Like your email's not loading, and suddenly you're convinced you're about to get fired.
That's a great example. And it's something, unfortunately, that a lot of people can relate to these days, especially, I think, after everything we've collectively been through the past few years.
But you mean with the pandemic? Because, yeah, Ansi had mentioned how that seemed to really kick things up a notch for a lot of folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, talk about a recipe for widespread anxiety. The pandemic brought isolation, fear of the unknown, economic instability, you name it.
A whole lot of uncertainty, that's for sure.
Exactly. And our brains, they don't love uncertainty. It makes sense that so many people's anxiety was heightened or even triggered for the first time during that period.
And it wasn't just a blip on the radar either, right? I mean, you pulled some pretty alarming statistics from like the World Health Organization, the APA.
Oh, yeah, and the CDC, too. The numbers don't lie. Hundreds of millions of people globally are dealing with anxiety disorders.
Hundreds of millions. That's wild.
It is. And one of the things that really stood out to me from those stats was the sharp increase in anxiety among younger people.
Oh, interesting. So not just a general uptick, but a generational one, too. ANSI data didn't go too deep into those specifics, did it?
It touched on it a bit, yeah, but the other research I looked at, it really highlights this trend of adolescents and young adults experiencing higher rates of anxiety than ever before, over 30% higher in just the last decade alone.
Wow, 30%. That's huge. So it's not just us. Anxiety really is more prevalent now, and younger generations are really feeling it.
Mhm.
Why is that? What's going on there?
Well, a lot of factors, probably. The pandemic, for sure, that played a part, but it's more complicated than that, especially when we're talking about younger generations. Auntie Dad briefly mentioned social media and how that whole
Oh,
landscape.
yeah, that makes sense. It's a whole other beast, right? Social media.
It is, and it's hard to escape. Constantly bombarded with images, with everyone else's highlight reel. It's a recipe for comparison, for feeling inadequate.
And the pressure to be on all the time, to have the perfect feed, the perfect life. I can see how that would be a breeding ground for anxiety.
Absolutely. And then you layer on top of that the pressures young people have always faced, right? School, college applications, career choices, figuring out who you are in the world.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Plus, the world itself feels kind of unstable right now, you know?
Yeah.
The economy, climate change.
It's a lot. And Auntie Dad really stressed that it's not just about our heads, right? Anxiety manifests physically too.
Yeah, that whole mind-body connection thing was really interesting.
It's huge. When we experience anxiety, our brains release these hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. They're what trigger that fight or flight response.
So like racing hearts, sweaty palms, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Our bodies are responding to those anxious thoughts in a very real physical way.
So if our bodies can make anxiety worse, can they also make it better?
That's the cool part, yeah. Exercise, for example. When we move our bodies, we release endorphins, which are like natural mood boosters. They counteract those stress hormones.
And we feel better. It's like that runner's high people talk about, right?
Exactly. And it's not just a temporary fix either. Regular exercise has been shown to actually reduce anxiety levels long term. Plus, it helps with sleep, and we know how important sleep is.
Oh, huge. When I'm sleep deprived, my anxiety is through the roof.
Makes sense. Lack of sleep just throws everything off kilter. And it's not just exercise. Mindfulness, meditation, even just taking some deep breaths, they all tap into that mind-body connection. They can help regulate our heart rate, our breathing.
So we can kind of hack our own system.
In a way, yeah. And the key, like with a lot of things, is finding what works for you. Maybe it's running, maybe it's yoga, maybe it's 10 minutes of meditation in the morning. The point is, there are things we can do.
I like that. So it's not about eliminating anxiety completely. It's about managing it.
Exactly. And Ansiedad gave some great tips for that too. Like, remember that thing about accepting our anxiety rather than trying to fight it?
Oh, yeah, acceptance over avoidance, right.
No. Yes. It's tough, but instead of trying to pretend we're not anxious, which just gives it more power, what if we just acknowledge it? Okay, this is anxiety. I feel it, but I don't have to let it control me.
Oh, I like that. It's like you're not denying it, you're just choosing not to let it call the shots.
Exactly. And speaking of things that can feel controlling, remember that other tip from Ansi Dad about setting boundaries with technology?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one these days. It's tough, right? Because like you said, it's not about disconnecting completely.
Yeah. Who can do that these days?
Right, exactly. But just being more mindful, maybe setting some limits on social media, putting the phone away an hour before bed.
Creating some space just to breathe.
Exactly. And that actually ties into the last tip from Ansi Dad I wanted to talk about making time for things we enjoy.
Oh, yeah, like that whole joyous antidote concept.
Yes, so important. We get so caught up in the to-do list, the worries,
Hmm.
we forget to actually enjoy ourselves.
100%. And it doesn't have to be some big production, right? Just little things that bring a little spark to your day.
Exactly. Whether it's music, a walk outside, calling a friend, reading a good book, whatever lights you up, those moments matter.
It's true. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but I feel like if we're going to leave our listener with some key takeaways about anxiety,
What have we learned?
yeah, what's the big picture? Well, first off, it's real,
Right.
right? And it's incredibly common. So if you're struggling, you're not alone.
100%. And it's not a weakness. It's just your brain and body doing what they think they need to do.
Right. It's not your fault. But there are things you can do about it.
And that's the hopeful part.
It is.
Yeah.
We talked about exercise, mindfulness, even just being more mindful about our technology use.
And don't forget the power of seeking support. Talking to a therapist, joining a support group, even just confiding in a trusted friend or family member, it can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. Sometimes just saying the words out loud, it really helps.
It does. So, listener, if you take away just one thing from this deep dive, let it be this. You are not alone, and there is hope. Anxiety might be a part of your story, but it doesn't have to define you.
Perfectly said. And on that note, we'll wrap it up for today. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Until next time, take care.